Good afternoon, folks. Right, thank you very much for joining us today. Hopefully, again, as usual, you've made it to the right session and you're here to take part in our Digital Transformation Challenges mini-series. So if you've made it this far with us, you have made it to our last in this series, talking about all the digital transformation challenges that we've been facing, and particularly those that we've been facing during the global pandemic and COVID-19 sort of lockdown periods. So hopefully you found the one so far with a little bit of insight and giving you some guidance and maybe some lessons learned from some of the experiences we've had. But if nothing else, just some talking points around this whole concept of challenges faced going digital. So let's start off with a few introductions. Hi there, I'm Anthony Martin, and I'm the Digital Innovations and Engagement Manager here at Exeter College. So my role here at the college, if you haven't been with us for the rest of the series, is to look at new digital technologies and tools and look at how we can integrate them into our workplace and into the syllabus in everything we're doing at Exeter College. So I sit somewhere between the IT departments and the teaching and learning departments, looking at how we can mash together those two areas and looking at our digital transformation piece as a college as well. So what we're going to talk about today isn't so much a series of things you should do necessarily, but it's just to create some talking points for you around some of these key areas and the challenges we faced. Now, up until this point in our sessions so far, we've covered off things around the innovation adoption lifecycle. We've looked at digital skills. We spent some time together on time and resources. And we've also then looked at fear and confidence, which is probably one of our most important elements of everything we're talking about with digital. Last week, we looked at communications. And then finally, this week, we're looking to the future a little bit more. So we're looking at AI, automation, standardization, and kind of driving some of those efficiencies as well within our institutions. What I would say, as with all the other sessions we've done here, they are part of our EdTech demonstrator program supports that we're offering as a college. So you are free to engage with us in that, and we're very happy to try and assist and try and help where we can to offer you any digital guidance that we can do. What we would ask is at the end of this session, we've included a link to a thing called a PID, which is a project initiation document. Basically, it's just a survey. It captures a little bit of info about your school or your institution. And it's really important for us to capture that, as it does help us continue to offer our support through this program. So if you are wanting to engage with us, even if you just want to come along to some of our webinars, if you could fill in that PID for us, that would be absolutely fantastic. And that will sort of help us capture the information we need to be able to assist you further. So onwards and upwards, let's have a look at today's session. So we're going to be taking a look, as I say, at this piece around automation. And I want to start off with really thinking about what this is. So fundamentally, the key thing I think around this whole piece around automation, around efficiencies, could come down to something as trivial as joined up thinking. So whether we look at it as joined up thinking, whether we look at it as maybe common sense approach in some of these things, it's really about those key areas that I'd like to explore with you around standardization, around support offerings and how they can be used to drive some of these efficiencies. Automation clearly is one of the key topics. AI is a really important factor then within everything around automation. And also then efficiencies, we're not going to cover specific efficiencies, but you'll pick those up throughout the discussion as we go through it today. Okay, so first up, we're going to take a look at standardization. And within standardization, this is my view of this is really how we've been delivering content and the approaches we've been using, particularly during lockdown, around the content creation in our lessons, in our learning objects, in our sort of flipped learning elements. And it's looking at the kind of things that I think are probably quite important to start considering there. Now, in our fourth session, we obviously talked about fears, and these are obviously still prominent and still present when we talk about standardization. Some of those fears are quite poignant, and ones we need to pay attention to are really people's perceptions that it's going to stamp out originality, that standardization will make it much more difficult to differentiate or to create differentiated learning, that the teachers themselves or tutors or other members of staff feel that they've become a bit of a robot to an automated process. And, those are very fair fears, I think, but they don't have to be. They don't have to be the actual scenarios, and they don't have to be the things that we're bound by. So personally, I think there are some huge benefits to looking to standardization in some areas. And in reality, I think we've actually already started to implement lots of them in our institutions without actually knowing it. So why standardize? Now, in my view, it's about these kind of things around consistency. It's consistency of inputs and outputs to help us identify areas that we might want to improve in, or where we've got areas of particularly good practice and we want to maybe build on those further. We've got the quality control aspects, which of course it's much easier to manage that quality piece if you have something by which to measure it. So if you have a standard process or a standard design or a standard template even, it's much easier to manage that expectation of the content if it is dealt with in a more standardized way. You've also got the brand strength aspect as well here. So by creating that area around quality, that improvement in quality that could come from standardization, you're also developing a brand around it. Now that could be a brand within a team, faculty or department, or as an entire school or college. It makes your product or your service or your sessions known for that kind of higher quality piece, and also consistent approach to it as well. Clearly, I think there are some time savings, and we're going to explore those in a little bit more detail in a moment. But fundamentally, if you think of it around each staff member in a delivery team, they could contribute towards the modules of content rather than everybody having to do exactly the same thing, but in a slightly different way. That also fosters collaboration. And I think that in itself is something that further compounds this whole process. A much more collaborative environment with teams working together is actually pretty inspiring to watch and to see. And it also helps with that future development piece as well. Next up, then we've got scalability. One of the benefits to standardization is the ability to scale en masse in a much quicker time frame than if you're doing things on an ad hoc basis. And my final point here on why to standardize is really around our newly qualified teachers. I've been one of these before, at least from an adult education point of view. And I know my first foray into education was a bit of a drop in the ocean from that point of view. It was really a sink or swim kind of experience, and being thrown in a situation where you have no content to start with, you have no frameworks to start with, those kind of aspects may not be the experience that your newly qualifieds have in every school or college, but there's certainly something that I think we hear all the time around jumping into a scenario where you haven't got necessarily those starting blocks. Standardization might help with some of that. So the next one I think I'd like to consider is really around this idea of expectations as well. So when we talk about standardization, people do think of it as, being off the book. You're going by the book, you're following all the rules as set out. There's no deviation from that. I think when we look at that in education, I think there can be some deviation. There can be still scope for creativity, and obviously diversification and inclusive elements being put into it. But our expectations in other areas of life are very different, aren't they? When we go to the likes of any of the brand names appearing on screen here, we expect a consistent experience. We expect that the quality is always up to the mark that we recognize for those brands. We expect that they offer a certain value. And the only reason that's possible really is because we know when we go from store to store or branch to branch, we're going to have exactly the same experience because the fries are going to be cooked in the same way, or the chicken is cooked to the same recipe. However, when we look at our education aspects, sometimes there is a vast difference in that. And yes, there is very much a creative place and a differentiated place, but we don't necessarily have that consistency for the learner journey from one learner to the next. And that, I think, is what I'd like to address in this piece. So when we think about the content creation side, this is what I look at in terms of that kind of formula for success. So Normally, in many areas, we would have one teacher creating 10 lesson units for the lessons they need to teach, giving them, let's say, 10 learning objects. Okay, that's pretty standard. Now, when we just do that at scale, we do repeat the same thing, but we just have more teachers doing the same thing. We end up with something probably more like this. So we have our 10 teachers, each creating 10 lesson units. We then come out with effectively 10 learning objects still, because they're all for the same modules. There's nothing different there, but we have 10 different student experiences. So each one creates a different tailored approach for each of the sort of students or cohorts that we've got. Now, there might be some tie in between tutors and teachers, and that's stepping towards this standardization piece. But we're not quite there yet, I don't think. So the kind of proposed approach here is around this idea of collaborative standardization, in sharing your content, in creating pools and banks of resources, where we've got 10 teachers creating their 10 lesson units, but there's shared effort between them and there's shared outputs, which ultimately mean, for those same man hours that we have, we've got then more learning objects. So we've got an increase in the amount of content that can be created. That's looking at a very basic way. Obviously, there are lots and lots of caveats and lots of discussion areas around that. Particularly, considerations I think that are really important in this are to understand that this kind of activity and process is probably already happening within your institution anyway. There will be areas where a lot of sharing is happening in faculties. There will be areas where probably there isn't so much. There's also consideration that the creation and curation of this kind of content, where you were to look at the shared model, it might fall to a few particularly capable or particularly able or digitally skilled people to do that. So I think on that side, it's worth bearing in mind that they might need to be recognized in some way. There might need to be some compensation of a form to help and promote that. But that doesn't mean that everyone else gets away scot-free. I think there are plenty of opportunities for everybody to get involved in these kind of processes. So people may not be great at creating those learning objects, but they may be excellent sort of subject specialists. So they may hold the knowledge behind it. They may have unique takes and ideas around things. So their involvement can still very much be part of that whole piece. And of course, one other aspect you could look at is to have a dedicated content creation team or a standardization team working on this with you. So those are some areas that you could consider within that. So that's just a quick brief point on standardization, just as I say, to drive some talking points. Next up, I would like to look at the support piece with you. So from a support point of view, this is really important particularly in our college, in terms of how we are driving that digital transformation piece. And as I said, we're not talking challenges here now. I'm trying to talk about opportunities and things you can improve on and things that could save you time. So here we have a few different ways that support could be offered, but each of them have a place. So no one of them is better than any others, but they all have a place within our support offering, I feel. Obviously, we've got the likes of self-service portals. Now, these are great. They do reduce the burden on support teams in delivering advice and guidance, but they can also depersonalize that service a little bit, and they can also remove some of the reporting and information that you would probably normally have by engaging with people directly. You tend to learn patterns rather than maybe areas of specific supports that are necessary. So I think there are some other things that need to be tied into that self-service piece. We've clearly got peer and community aspects, so this could be something like a team. We've set up a Teams 101 page, which is available for everybody to take part in, and it just allows that community support piece to happen. You've got on-demand content capabilities, so things like the new announcement with Microsoft and their Viva product to drive that content to people when they want it, where they want it, and how they want it, rather than being dictated to by us. I think there's still a place here for one-to-one support as well. So that's that mentoring, that coaching, and that support piece to help people overcome sort of barriers they're encountering, And I think that is one that's quite important to continue. And then, of course, we've got our traditional formal training, sitting in a lecture theatre with or without devices to help and support those programs. So I think all of those approaches are important. One of the ones we're going down quite heavily, and I think most of you have probably got an IT support desk or something of that sort by now, but is around this idea of self-service, in empowering people to find the information that they need when they need it, rather than having to wait and sit in a queue for that info. So that's one of ours, and then a piece we're going to look at later on with AI sort of takes this a step further again. Okay, so automation. Now this is a really nice one. This is probably the meat of some of the things we're looking at. And again, there are some fears around automation as a general concept. So there's this thought again that people feel they may become obsolete, that there might be much more need for advanced skill sets that maybe not present in the business at the moment. And of course, what happens to our processes and our automation if it's unsupervised? What happens if it fails? What happens if it doesn't quite follow the process properly? And that's probably quite a realistic concern to have, and it's something that we have to build into our automation processes. And then, of course, finally, there's the keeping up with changes aspect. Automation, just once you put it in, doesn't mean that you can set it and forget it and walk away. There's probably going to be a need to come back to that later and enhance, improve, and add other elements to it. But there are clearly huge benefits in automation. Some of the reasons might be for compliance purposes. Time and efficiency savings, absolutely. Yes, this is one area you can save a lot of time. In terms of consistency of approach, and then we're back on again with quality control. We can increase our throughput, and we can maybe create more on-demand support offerings as well. And of course, there's that newly qualified teacher part as well, is that there are some areas we could automate to make their lives easier as well. So that's the why. This is the what. What could we do? Well, anything that's repetitive and well-defined, we could certainly try and automate that. And there are lots of tools out there. So there are things like screen scraping tools, which will move the mouse and so on for you. There are scripted solutions that you can use to create programmatic answers to things. There were obviously drag and drop builders. And there are also things like Microsoft Power Automate as well, which you can use to create a kind of user-driven workflow. If something happens, then do something else. So if I get an email from a certain person, send out another email to my entire team, for instance. Those kind of automations are quite easy to put into place. But other things we can do are we can automate document scanning. So where you've got maybe PDF files or you've got paper records and so on that have been brought into your office, these could be enrollment forms. You can use document scanning with zones to basically pull that information back into a digital system again. Automates that process. It means people don't need to rekey the data. That's a huge time saver in its own right. Document production, really key area for automation here. So why write your letters from scratch every time? Start from a template, but there are systems to then help and manage that. Similarly with customer relationship management, systems monitoring from an IT point of view is to be able to know when our servers are working, not working, when there might be a trend that's suggesting something needs to be looked at. And then finally, things around sentiment tracking. And this is a really interesting one. I've got some nice parts to show you on this one. So some examples. So some of the ways that we've looked at these kind of aspects ourselves. Team creation. So we create all of our teams automatically off the back of our MIS data, and that's done with something called School Data Sync. We create our accounts from an automatic scripted process. So when HR informs us that new staff are starting, we have a process that spins up and creates those accounts for us. Equally, we do the same with student enrollments as well. Password resets. Again, why have somebody sitting there manning a password reset line when you can empower people to be able to reset their own? We do it with our banks, we do it with our social media accounts. Why not with our college accounts? Things like zone-based scanning we just mentioned, so using optical character recognition to work out what's being written and whether it's in handwriting or text or printed text, to be able to capture that and put it back into our systems again. And then another part we've done some work with is around room bookings, the car park side of things, and visitors. You know, these are all resource intensive processes, and a lot of it could be automated. And in our case, certainly with the visitor system, it has been for us. Looking at it from a more teacher point of view, though, there are obviously some other benefits here as well. So we've got self-marking quizzes now with Microsoft Forms. So you don't need to do the marking element. Quizzes answer themselves and then notify the students of their scores. You could have timed content release. So your emails go out at a certain time tomorrow morning. Or you schedule your social media posts and those kind of things. So that's another way of automating things, so you don't have to stay up until 12 o'clock at night to push out that important social media post at whatever time your audience engage with you best. You can time that with one of the kind of social tools. Form responses, so when you receive feedback or when you receive input on a form, that can trigger something else happening. So it could be just a simple thank you response to the person, or it could be something to action your team and to get them to start doing something. And then, of course, online booking systems, which we have used here at the college for things like parents' evenings, virtual tours, sort of adult bookings, and also student interviews and those kind of things. So to allow students to book slots of time with our teachers on those programs. And that's, again, an automated piece that would have previously been done by someone sitting on a phone and typing manually into a system. So for us, then, one of the key things we delivered this year, or put out this year, was our visitor system. So this is a great example of automation in play. It now means we've got one system across college. All of our badges are auto-printed. It's entirely self-service if we want it to be. We can even track deliveries through the system. We can build in COVID-19 questionnaires for our visitors to ask them, have they been exposed to somebody recently? That might cause them to have to self-isolate, so we can capture that kind of info from the outset. We've got a much faster turnaround then as a result in our receptions, which speeds up that whole process, frees up our receptionist time to maybe answer other queries and calls, and we have improved visitor satisfaction from it. So this is just one area of automation, but you can already see the huge benefits that just that one change, that one platform could do. So next up, sorry for the brief pause there. Next up, and this is now really starting to get into the really cool stuff, and I think looking to the future a bit more. Artificial intelligence. This is where a lot of the activities now are going to be based. So just an important point, when we look at AI versus automation, sorry, they don't have to be mutually exclusive, but they don't have to be the same thing either. Automation doesn't have to use AI, but it can really benefit when it does. And AI can be used for other things like decision making, where perhaps just simple automation can't in many cases. Why do it though? Why drive towards automation? Well, how about some of these? So boredom and fatigue. A machine doesn't tend to get bored. It doesn't tend to get tired. It may need repairing occasionally, but when we talk about computers and machine learning, we humans tend to get a lot more tired by repetitive tasks. So there's some benefits there in terms of just continuing plowing on through things. What about scale? Machines and machine learning tools, they can scale rapidly with sudden demand. So if you take on another 1,000 students 1 year because of demographic changes, you're then automatically in a position where you can scale up your processes to meet that need. Clearly, computers can process things a lot faster than humans, and that's quite an important part. And that obviously delivers then time savings, where we're getting machines to do the more mundane things, but we can then free up our human workforce to do the things that we're good at. So that human touch element is still very much a piece. When we're talking about the fears around people losing jobs to AI and robots and all those kind of things, I don't think you lose them. I think it does change and possibly repurpose to some degree. But it frees the humans up to do the things that we are good at. We're very good at creative. We're very good at building and building information and designing and imagining things. That's something that machines are pretty bad at so far. I'm sure that will change, but at the moment we've still got top trumps there. So those are the areas that I think we can focus a lot more of our value as people. So, okay, I've talked to you for ages for why and the why nots of these kind of things. What about some actual tools, some actual things that we can do? So how about these? Let's have a look at some that you're going to be using already, but you may not realize it's AI driving it. So in PowerPoint, if you've created a PowerPoint in the last 3 years, you've probably used automation in some way and AI. Design ideas built straight into it, and this is something that as soon as you throw a couple of bits of text and some pictures onto a slide, it will come up with some design ideas for how that slide could look. And a lot of what you've seen in my presentation today is done using exactly that. This is an awesome tool. It was designed for basically partially sighted people from an accessibility point of view, so that they could also create great looking presentations. But for everybody, this is a really cool tool to make things a lot simpler. So this is an efficiency, this is a time saving, because I can now throw a PowerPoint together in about 1/10 of the time. That's pretty handy. Okay, the next one I want to share with you is a thing called sentiment tracking. And if you haven't heard about this, this is a bit of a door opener for a lot of really cool ideas and great new ways of working. And I want to just share this video out with you, so hopefully this plays okay. It gives you a bit of an insight into what this actually means.
In this quick video, we will see how to do sentiment analysis with Excel. The input data is simple. I have text and I want to classify each sentence as positive, negative, or neutral. We are going to use an add-in. Insert, add-in, search for Azure Machine Learning, and click on Add. Do authentication if required. And now it will open a pane on the right side. Use the second one, text sentiment analysis. We need to give the input data and the output data. Click on this button and select the input data. You must use tables in Excel to become more efficient. Watch my Excel tables video to understand why. Don't select the header, click OK. Make sure My Data Has Headers option is off. In the output context, we want the output to go here, which is D3. So just type D3, no headers, and then say predict. The Azure Machine Learning has classified our text into neutral, positive, or negative. If you enable the auto predict checkbox, you can change the text and it will automatically apply the prediction. The score indicates how confident the algorithm was in the prediction. So if you see a value which is very low, that means even though it is classified as negative, it may or may not be negative. So it's a good idea to check all the values which are below a certain confidence limit. If the score is less than 3, I am putting the word check manually. Otherwise, I take the actual sentiment value. Now I'm going to create a pivot table. So this is how you can get a better understanding of textual data by using sentiment analysis. That's it for now. Thank you.
So I put the link up on the slide there if you wanted to take a look at that in a little bit more detail. But it relies on something called cognitive services from Microsoft. And in 90 seconds there, what you've just basically seen, and we'll just jump onto the next slide here. So hopefully you could see that quite clearly on screen just a second ago. But why it's useful is because it now takes that that qualitative data that we've been used to from surveys and survey forms, this session was fantastic, please do more of these, to the feedback that maybe, didn't enjoy this at all, session was awful, presenter was awful, change it for next time. when you've got that in 2 or 3 responses, that's quite easy to work with. When you've got it in 10,000 responses, that's a much harder set of data to work with and to understand what the general trends are. Sure, you can put a 1 to 10 scale on some of those as well, but this gives you a general view of kind of what that is. So you can assess based on text, whether it's positive, negative, or neutral, or somewhere in between those. Why that becomes really useful for us, though, is when we're managing things like our social channels. So if you think about automation in, do you have time as a team to respond to every post on your social media channel? Maybe not. Which ones are the most important to you? Are they the positives? So the people who are engaged, the people who love your story and brand? Yes, they are important. But what about the negative ones? Are they opportunities to maybe change someone's opinion of you, to change their view, or to actually say, look, you've had a bad experience, I'm sorry, we can help you with that, and here's how. But how do you sort through those? Again, if you're receiving 10,000 comments, let's say, how do you analyze that? Well, you could leverage something like this tied to your social feeds to do that for you. So it can flag up for you which ones are the ones that I really need to focus my my customer support team on, for instance. You know, who do I need to direct to that particular issue? So you can use that to track it. There are other ways that you could use this, and I think we need to consider the ethics approach here as well. But in the future, we might be able to use this to monitor things like well-being. So in conversations that we're having naturally on teams, if this is employed behind the scenes, I think the ethics are overcome a little bit by the fact it's not actually one of us as a human who is doing this. It's something that is being done automatically by machine learning. But we could pick out triggers that are important for us from a safeguarding or well-being point of view, and we can then use that to act on them. I wouldn't use it as your first line of defense, but it is something to help build a profile perhaps and make sure you can sort of offer that support where it's needed. And of course, obviously turning opinions into metrics. So then we can create analysis of data from it. So we can start working out, actually, generally, do people like this idea or not? And we can do that based on their opinion. So that's sentiment tracking. I think that's got a lot of potential for the future. What about bots, though? We've seen bots and they've been around for a while, but what about knowledge bases and bots? Well, again, using cognitive services in Azure, you can create really quite quickly with a little simple wizard on screen, a bot that will interrogate your knowledge base. So if you've got a series of questions and answers matched together, you can create a searchable knowledge base that can be used by your students or your staff to signpost them to tools, tips, resources, pages, websites, you know, whatever resource or content is behind that. You can create a very simple bot that then uses the same kind of sentiment tracking we've just looked at to signpost people where they need to go. So that's quite a useful one, and that's another area where AI and automation can save us some time. Because again, if you remember on our support piece, we were looking at how we can use support offerings to reduce the burden on support teams, but also to offer a better service, and that is one of them. Next up, you're going to see another area of AI. So this is language recognition now. So popping up on screen, you'll see a little animation there of speaker attributed subtitles. So in Teams, this came into play in October last year. If you turn on subtitles during your chat, you'll now see that the speakers are attributed to their words. So you can see when you're looking through the transcript who said what. That's great for most of us, but also particularly from an accessibility point of view now, we've got that kind of embedded into the conversation. It means that people can see who's saying what. And those who are hard of hearing, for instance, can also still engage in the conversation. That in itself is a really important piece from an automation aspect. But it does then mean you're not having to produce content in lots of different formats. So you're saving time again there because you've built in something like this. Or in fact, you've not done anything to build it. You've just turned the feature on. So again, that kind of aspect is really quite useful. But where we might see that going later is, and I think this is in the pipeline potentially in some of the works with Microsoft, is why not have your meeting minutes delivered back to you? So why have somebody sitting there writing up all the minutes, not necessarily taking part in the discussion, because multitasking is not quite as efficient as we often think it is. Why not have the meeting do that for you and then send them back to every participant? That could be quite a cool one for the future, I think. What about translation then? So we're still on language topic. What about this aspect of on-the-fly translation? Traditionally, we would spend time and resource creating alternate language versions of documents or alternate language versions of training materials. Well, now we've got Immersive Reader built into all the Office 365 suites. We've got it built into the Edge browser, and elements of it starting to go into Windows as an OS. Why design those resources separately? Allow the user to, with their own empowerment, to use things like Immersive Reader and translate them on the fly natively or naturally into their own language, and then flip between the two of them. So again, you're creating, you're enabling use of that service and saving people time in the process, but also improving your experience in the process. Next up, and I'm very conscious of time, and I would like to allow some time for questions for everybody as well if you have any, but these are really quite important as well. Data-driven insights in Office 365. So again, that AI piece, that automation piece, here are some of our genuine stats, and these are fresh off the press from this morning. So this is our Office 365 admin aspect, and it gives some great insights for leaders of schools and colleges about how people are using their time and how people are using the systems. So 16% of people spend over 10 hours in meetings a week. 78% of users of instant meetings or use them for less than 30 minutes. So they're quite short and concise. 30% of people within the organization, they participate in those instant meetings. So that gives you some idea about who's going where, what is the kind of working profile. And there's lots and lots of different metrics here within this platform. So it gives you some great insights into maybe where to focus training, or maybe where there are improvements. Does everybody need to be in a 1-hour meeting? Could we shorten them? And that then leads into some further insights that we've got. Again, some of our metrics, we know now because of this tool that 68% of people use Teams channels to communicate now. Now, if we go back 4 years, that would have been email. So there's a big change already in that kind of thing. These stats also tell us that despite our best efforts, nobody is using the questions and answers section of Yammer. So we have to look at that quite realistically. Is that something we want to continue, or do we need to offer better support there? We also see that when you add an @mention, so when you mention somebody's name and you tag them in an email, you get a 21% higher response rate. So again, we can use all these metrics to drive our decisions, and to kind of create those efficiencies that we've been looking for, really out of the box from what we've got in front of us. Not a lot of extra effort having to go into this because of the AI and machine learning behind the scenes doing it. I'll give you a few quick sort of tour items of other insights. So this is my own sort of daily briefing from Cortana. This is an example of one of the ones I've received in the past. And it's analyzing my emails, and it's saying, look, what have I promised people in my emails that maybe I haven't created a task for? So again, automation and AI combined together, reading through my emails alongside me. So it's a little bit spooky, but do I want to add these to my to-do list? And popping that back to me to say, look, you haven't responded to this person yet. Maybe set up a meeting, maybe follow that through. So that's a really insightful piece from an end user point of view. Taking that further, we've got this great one around analytics now. So my analytics and helping with my focus and well-being, looking at how often I spend in my own meetings. Do I set aside quiet time and focus time for me to work? And I can capture all this in an email that comes into my inbox through the My Analytics tool every day. Just some insights there from mine. So these were useful for me this morning looking through. But it looks at my network. So 48% of the people I engage with are outside of the college. That's quite a big number, and that helps me frame my day. Distracted by email, so there's potential for me to be distracted because I respond to emails normally within about 30 minutes of receiving them. So again, should I be scheduling that throughout the day? So it helps me design my workflow and my process. And I think clearly, like everybody else, I probably spend more of my week in meetings than I really would like to. So there are some suggestions and recommendations off the back of this. So these are the ways that AI can help us, and automation can help us. And I'm not going to show you the video for this, but I would like to talk as my one sort of final piece here around this of an inspiring story. So I'm going to name drop. This is a chap called Daniel Baker. So Daniel is with Microsoft. He's got a page that I've displayed on there for you, azuredan.co.uk. And in particular, he's put together a little bit of a blog around a project called IOMe. And this is basically how Daniel has used data and AI and Microsoft Cognitive Services to take data from his diabetic sort of checks. So he's had a little Bluetooth monitor, checking his sugar levels, his glucose levels throughout the day, building a data profile, and has now basically reversed his condition entirely, has no dependence anymore on medication. So that's a medical world aspect, but it is a prime example of how we can use these amazing tools that we have to actually really drive some good. Okay, and from my point of view then, so just some takeaways for you, some final points, and if you do have any questions, obviously start writing those in the chat box now, and I'll do my best to answer. And for today, really, takeaways are that automation and AI can be a force for positive change. It's not all about Terminators and Skynet. It is something that we can really get some real world benefits from. It can be quite hungry in terms of data. So, you know, data in gives you information out. The quality of the data going in will lead to better quality information coming out. Knowing your processes. So in terms of designing these automations and routines, it's really good to understand what processes you have in place at the moment and where your data and information is flowing around your business. Use these tools to automate the mundane. And then finally, use the kind of automations and cognitive services for your business insights and recommendations. So those are some great tools already there. You can start building some useful work patterns off the back of it. And those are my takeaways. So, as I say, thank you everyone for taking part today. I think we've just run to time with a few minutes left for questions if anybody has any at all for me. We'll hang around for a little bit. So do feel free to put those in the chat. And as I mentioned at the start, if you are taking part in the EdTech demo program or you found us through that, we really would appreciate if you could take the time to fill in a PID. It's a very short survey. It just asks you a little bit about your journey with digital, where you are, kind of where your institution's at, and it's sort of the way that we can unlock our support through the program. So if you want to engage with us further and you're looking for additional support or come along to more of our webinars and sessions, then if you could fill one of those in, that will be a great kickstart to that, and it will just give us some insights to get started and look at how we might be able to help you further. But otherwise, I'm going to stop talking, and it's over to you if you do have any questions. And once again, thanks very much.